From University of Utah Health and the Scope presents, this is Clinical.
I'm Mitch Sears, and this is Clinical. Today's story takes us on a journey of courage, resilience, and the unbreakable bonds of family. Today we'll be sharing the story of Nelly Sierra, a woman whose life reflects the struggles and hopes of many who embark on a harrowing journey in search of a better future. Sierra's tale begins in Honduras with its high level of violent crime and gang activity, where the daily threat of violence looms over its citizens. Her journey to the United States is not just a quest for safety, but a testament to her spirit and determination to provide for her family. Through the lens of Sierra's experiences, we explore the challenges faced by those who risk everything to cross borders. It's a narrative that delves deep into the themes of maternal sacrifice, the immigrant experience, and the relentless pursuit of the American dream, as well as an exploration of her transformation from a fearful traveler to a resilient survivor, and ultimately, a leader in the community. In today's episode, you will be hearing the voice of Nayeli Hernandez. She will be helping us to translate and voice Sierra's firsthand experience for our English listeners. Written and reported by Stephen Dark, Clinical presents The Crossing.
The women walked in a line, several men in front, several behind. They only walked at night, under a desert moon that shaded the rocks in quicksilver. Several of the men shouted at women who were slow, who stumbled, who pleaded for rest. Occasionally, they would pass places where the smell of death, of a corpse, clung to the air. Nelly Sierra knew that such bodies were a woman or a child, or perhaps an elderly person, who had fallen victim to the many predators that haunted the border between Mexico and the United States.
En el camino también se veían personas mordidas de culebra.
On the pathway, you would see people bitten by snakes, others that perhaps had been hit and left lying there because they couldn't go on. If you get tired and the coyote had a specific arrival time and you don't hurry enough for him, you will be left on the pathway.
Te dejan tirado en el camino.
These days, you'll find the 50-year-old University of Utah Health Business Services supervisor Monday to Friday in her office in a back room on the ground floor of the Sugar House Clinic. There she administers 17 environmental services employees responsible for cleaning Sugar House and 2 other clinics. Nelly is from Honduras, one of the most violent countries in the world. In 2019, 13 people were murdered every day, giving it a homicide rate of 44.7 per 100,000. Only El Salvador can claim higher rates. She has a work visa, a privilege earned through hard work, determination, and a commitment to her family. While there are many colleagues in EVS who share similar stories of surviving horrific journeys to reach the US, few are willing to share them with such candor and detail. And looking back, Nelly is still surprised she succeeded.
Un camino muy difícil.
A very difficult road that if I had to do it again, I don't think that I'd make it.
Nelly's story is more than simply someone seeking a better life. It's a tribute to a relationship that defines all our lives, the bond between mother and child. Nelly was born in Honduras, in Catacamas, in the department of Olancho, to her single mother, Maria Cristina Sierra. Like so many Honduran children, Maria Cristina's childhood was consumed by working for her parents to help support them and her siblings. Maria Cristina had become pregnant at 14 with her first child, going on to raise 5 boys and Nelly, her one daughter, alone. She was determined that teen pregnancy would not befall her daughter. Her mother worked in restaurants and ironed clothing. 11-year-old Nelly helped her mother by raising the youngest two boys while her mother was at work. That included Nelly feeding and putting her younger siblings to bed while her mother worked nights. Above all else, her mother insisted on one thing: to do her very best at school.
I remember her telling me, all you have to do is bring me good grades and stay out of trouble.
Yo tenía que llevar un 5, un 5, un 5, un 5.
I had to get almost perfect scores. It made me become responsible.
Una mujer responsable.
Maria Cristina knew the cruel realities of city life and refused to let Nelly go even to the corner on her own. While her brothers were furious that they had to sell food on street corners, her mother worked hard to keep Nelly focused only on her studies. But when she was 18, Nelly dated a 28-year-old friend of one of her brothers. The man, a taxi driver, got her pregnant. Things did not go well. He proved to be physically and mentally abusive. Nelly's son was born on February the 6th. She felt she had let her mother down and begged her to support her while she finished her secretary school.
Trabajando, sacando.
When my son was born, I told my mother not to work, but to take care of her grandson, and that I would be responsible for all of her expenses.
De todos los gastos de ella.
She graduated with good marks and worked in a clothing factory, inspecting goods made for export to the US to support her mother and her own son. Despite having work, life was far from easy. She earned very little, just $12 a week in Honduran currency. Without a car, she'd have to walk home from work. It was a situation that her child's biological father would take advantage of to harass her. Driving his taxi behind her, he'd honk on the horn, hold out money and shout, "How much do you charge?" She'd get home in tears. When she was 24, a friend from the neighborhood told her he could arrange a crossing for her to the United States. Like so many others, she wanted a better life for her family, even if it meant risking her life to cross the border. First, she had to convince her mother, from whom she had never been apart.
Nunca me había separado de mi hijo ni de mi mamá. O sea, para mí era difícil.
I had never been separated from my son or my mother, so it was difficult for me. But I said, Mother, this is the only opportunity we have to get ahead, because we lived in a rented house, and there was no way that we can buy our own, because we just worked. What I earned was just to survive.
Lo que yo ganaba era para sobrevivir.
Maria Cristina stood her ground.
Entonces me dijo ella, no, yo no quiero que te vayas.
So she told me, no, I don't want you to leave. I told her, but look, if I leave, I can help my son. I can make his house for him. Well, I finally convinced her. My mother didn't say goodbye to me. She hid from me the day I left for here. She hid. She didn't want me to see her crying. So I left. It was hard.
Es duro.
Nelly's odyssey began on April the 6th, 1996, when the 24-year-old left home to meet up with a male friend who had arranged to take her to a coyote who would guide her across the desert. Later, Nelly learned that her mother had visited with her male friend before they had left, telling him she would kill him if anything happened to Nelly. They crossed Guatemala in a car, and when they got to the Mexican border, had to wait in a house for several days while their guide made contacts to cross the desert. There, Nelly said goodbye to her friend. That first attempt to cross stalled, and Nelly found herself stuck with other women who wanted to make the trip with the same coyote in Mexico for some time. Nelly stayed with the family, who gave her their daughter's name and national identity card number, so if she was caught, La Migra would return her to Mexico rather than Honduras. Her first crossing was terrifying.
Veníamos en un tráiler de esos de carga.
We were in one of those cargo trailers that they put you in. You practically undress because it's very hot. You have no air. You are short of breath. We had about 2 hours in there, and when we finally arrived, they made us get down.
Y cuando ya por fin llegamos donde teníamos que llegar, nos bajaron.
They started walking.
Cruzamos, caminamos como Yo creo como unas 8 horas.
We walked across. I think we walked for about 8 hours during the night, and just at dawn, they caught us. Americans with guns and everything. They threw us to the ground. You know, they put their feet on you so that you don't move with your hands behind your back and things like that. I felt that my heart was pounding. I was afraid, nervous. We didn't know what was going to happen to us.
No, yo sentía que mi corazón se me salía. Miedo, nervios, no sabíamos qué iba a pasar con nosotros.
Nelly couldn't even be sure if the men who had caught her were who they claimed to be.
Pues no se sabía si en realidad eran policías o eran gente.
You don't know if they really are police or bad people disguised as police. It's a risk. You don't know if you'll get to wherever you're going or whatever.
The Border Patrol deported her and the rest of her group. Thanks to the family who had lent her their daughter's information, she was returned to Mexico rather than Honduras. Her second attempt, she and her group walked from 5 p.m. until 8 a.m. the next morning. She twisted her ankle, and by the time they stopped, her foot was swollen. She had to ignore it and pray the swelling would subside. There was no way back now. An air of menace pervaded the journey. Women were prey to the men who went with them.
Our group, fortunately, thank God, things went well for us.
Vimos muchas cosas en los caminos.
We saw many things. We saw many things on the road. For example, the men grabbed some of the women by force, and it was frightening. We saw a girl who woke up crying the next morning. I'm a person who doesn't like injustice, so I went to talk to her and asked her what happened. She said nothing. But then we were alone, and she told me that the boy had told her that if she didn't have sex with him, she would not pass.
What kept Nelly going was the thought of those who depended on her.
But thank God, my son and my mother gave me the strength to get here.
Finally, they reached the border.
A mí me tomó, hasta cruzar como quien dice el
I was
border.
walking until we crossed the line that divides Mexico and the United States. We walked for about 2 hours more here in the United States, and they picked us up to bring us to Phoenix in a car. I had hurt my foot, and they put me in a car, then put another person in between my feet. Then when they went to get me out of the car, I couldn't move because my legs were asleep and because I'd injured my foot.
Descompuesto mi pie.
When they reached Phoenix, they were taken to an empty house with no kitchen or bathroom. They slept in a line along the floor. For 3 days she waited. Out of fear, none of her group left the house. And then, finally, she learned it was time to leave. Nelly had a friend who lived in Salt Lake City with his family. A relative of that friend took her from Phoenix to Utah. And so began her life of exile from those she loved, in the land of plenty.
Muy bonito el país, muy bonito los dólares.
It's a very nice country, and it's very nice to see the dollars when you start to earn them. But it's very difficult, especially when you leave your people behind. It was very difficult.
Cuando dejas tu gente allá. Fue muy difícil pensar que digo yo.
In comparison to her hometown's muddy streets, America's sidewalks were made of concrete and stone.
Llegaste acá.
The streets in Honduras were dirt where I lived. So here you walk on sidewalks. You don't get dirty. You wear good clothes if you want. You eat well.
Pero sientes que nada te llena.
As she ate her American food, all she could think of was what her mother and son had to eat back home.
No hay nada que te satisfaga.
But you feel that nothing fills you up. Nothing satisfies you. For example, I ate a hamburger and I didn't eat it in peace because I said, I'm eating, but I don't know if my son is eating. It's hard.
Es duro.
Her plan was to stay in the US to earn enough money to buy her mother a home and then return.
No, yo venía por 2 años. 2 años.
I came for 2 years. For 2 years, I came to make money to build a house for my mother and my son, so she wouldn't have to rent. And those years have turned into 24 years of my life. I've given this country 24 years of my life.
Yo llegué a la edad de 24.
She sits back and looks around her office, taking in all that has happened to get her here. Once she had found somewhere to live in Salt Lake City, she looked for work. With no resume and little English, she applied to fast food restaurants to do food prep, expecting that she just had to speak Spanish in the kitchen. That didn't turn out quite as she had hoped.
Yo aplicaba para la cocina.
I would apply for the kitchen and they would put me up front, like at the cash register. And then I didn't like that because of the language. That made me so nervous because they didn't let me work where I wanted to. I didn't like it.
Entonces, como no me dejaban donde yo quería, no me gustó.
She tried housekeeping. First, she worked at Holiday Inn near the Salt Lake City International Airport, then at a small hotel chain. In late 2010, she found work with a friend in a Las Vegas hotel.
Housekeeping en Las Vegas es pesado. Es muy pesado.
Housekeeping in Las Vegas is tough, very tough, because they give you many rooms to clean. And it depends on the supervisor. And supervisors who are bad check on you all the time, even though they know you don't have time to do all the details. It was just very difficult. Fortunately, as I said, I always had God's blessing before me.
One of her supervisors was constantly on her case.
Llegué, me daban los cuartos.
I came in, she gave me some rooms, and I tried as best as I could. The supervisor didn't like me. She always found fault with what I did. Look, you didn't do that. I would explain I just didn't have time. You still have to do it. Well, in the end, I adapted and I cleaned everything. And they promoted me to clean the penthouses.
Me pasaron a limpiar los penthouses.
Penthouses posed unique challenges.
Porque me dieron ese lugar.
They gave me that place because nobody wanted to clean them. Because they are delicate places that you have to clean well. Sometimes they have many valuable things. You have to be very careful.
Mucho cuidado.
It was exhausting work.
Con decirte que llegaba a la casa, si yo me sentaba
I'll tell
en
you
el
that
sillón,
when I got home,
zapatos,
if I sat on the couch and took my shoes off, I would never get up from how tired I was.
entonces yo lo que hacía llegar,
So what I
quitarme
did
los
was
zapatos
take off
y
my shoes and
empezar a
start
cocinar
cooking
para
for the
los niños.
children because if I didn't,
Porque
I
si
wouldn't
no,
feed them.
no le
It
daba
was
de comer.
very
Era-
difficult.
es muy difícil, la verdad.
It's very difficult to work there if you are a responsible person.
Si eres una responsable-
If you are a
una persona
person who
responsable,
isn't
si eres alguien
bothered,
que
then
tú
it's just
te
something
vale,
normal.
es algo
But I
normal.
have always liked to do
Pero a mí
things
siempre me ha
well.
gustado hacer las cosas
Always,
bien.
always.
Siempre.
After 4 years working in the Midwest, Nelly had yet to secure a visa. She had applied several times for a visa for people fleeing violence or environmental disaster, called a temporary protected status, but she had not been successful. Then she hired an immigration attorney to apply on her behalf for a work visa, but again struck out. Like so many millions of others, she had to live waiting for that knock on the door. She tried a second time to get TPS status with a different attorney. He discovered she had a deportation order filed against her, which was inactive, but warned her that the proceedings might make things worse rather than better.
No te garantizo de que te
I
lo den
don't
para atrás.
guarantee that they will give it to you. It's 50-50, as he told me. They could deport you. So I told him,
Entonces le digo,
well,
bueno, pues
I have
no
nothing to
tiene
lose by
nada.
trying to do it. Let it all be in God's hands.
Que se quede en las manos de Dios todo.
When she had a court hearing to attend, she was terrified.
Cada vez que iba a
Every
migración,
time I went to
Señor, yo
immigration,
sentía que-
Lord, I felt my insides trembling because I felt that once I went in, I wouldn't be coming out,
Pues yo sentía
and they would
como que
send me
entraba
back
y
to
no
my
iba a volver a
country.
salir de ahí, que me iban a mandar para mi país.
In the end, in 2010, she was granted legal work status.
Fortunately, my deportation order was suspended, and I was given a work permit.
Permiso para trabajar.
Over the next 4 years, Nelly worked hard in Las Vegas, faithfully sending money home to her mother and son to support them. By then, she was also raising 3 US-born children, 2 boys and a girl, from 2 relationships that had not worked out. Then, in June 2014, she received a phone call that would change everything. A relative she had in Salt Lake City told her that her firstborn son had crossed the border alone. The 24-year-old was already in the United States and they were going to pick him up. Nelly took time off work and traveled to Utah to meet him after 18 years of separation. 2 days after the call, she crossed the Utah border and headed for West Valley and her brother's house. Her son arrived at the house the next morning.
It was so emotional. I was hugging him, I was touching him, I was caressing him. I was telling him that he was the same little boy that I had left, but now a big and skinny one. He has his little legs that are open here, and I call him my old man because his legs aren't even. I tell him that's why he looks shorter when he walks, but he is my size. But I bug him a lot.
But her joy was quickly tamped down when she learned about events that had taken place around the same time she reunited with her son.
What was sad and strange and I don't know was that my mother had already been sick for some time. So they took her to the hospital and they told me to get ready because your mother won't go on for much longer.
She called her mother at the hospital to tell her the good news that her grandson had arrived safely to her waiting arms.
We talked to my mother and I told her, "Mother, my son is already here with me." And she said, "I don't believe you." I said, "Yes." Then I took a picture and I sent it to her and told her, "Look, he is here with me." And she said, "Thank God I can die in peace."
Nelly drove back from West Valley to Las Vegas with her children. 2 hours after she got to bed, the phone rang. It was a relative in Honduras.
I was told that my mother had already died.
It would have been her 66th birthday.
I think that the responsibility of having my son there wouldn't allow her to go in peace.
Ya puedo descansar en paz, sí.
Shortly after her mother died, Nelly lost her housekeeping job in Las Vegas. Her relatives brought her and her children to live in Utah. Nelly applied to University of Utah Health to join environmental services. She started working for the university in December 2016. Cleaning surfaces, particularly in a hospital, is a much more complex science than a Las Vegas penthouse.
Es como te digo, ¿cómo te diré? Es delicado.
It's like this. It's delicate because you have to disinfect, you have to give it the necessary time. For example, all the chemicals you have to use to clean need to have time to kill all the germs.
Es como una responsabilidad. Tienes que ser responsable para poder
It's a responsibility. You have to be responsible to be able to do that job. Because if you don't do it, you know you're putting at risk both yourself and the patient that's going to come maybe after you cleaned because you didn't remove the germs that are there.
El microbio, el germen que está ahí en el lugar.
Okay, this breaking news is about the coronavirus in Utah.
In early 2020, as Utah confronted the first waves of COVID-19 infections, U of U Health was in the final throes of preparation for opening the new Sugar House Clinic across from Sugar House Park. It's an impressive 5 floors, fronted by floor-to-ceiling windows and an atrium distinguished by natural stone tile. Nelly was one of the 16 EVS technicians who had to clean the building post-construction and make it ready for the public. As the summer clinic opening approached, Nelly and her colleagues found themselves on the front line of fighting the virus. In those first months of the pandemic, when so little was known about the virus and its transmission, Nelly faced the potential horror of exposing her children to it.
Cuando empezó la enfermedad,
So when the disease started, like everyone, I was afraid. With the hand sanitizer, we already have our hands all worn out from so much washing and using that sanitizer. This thing that suffocates me, the mask, left my face all marked. Arriving home and taking off all my clothes practically outside to go directly into the bathroom to protect my children, it's difficult.
es algo difícil.
The pandemic took its toll on EVS staff, resulting in some leaving out of concern about virus exposure. One of those who departed was the supervisor at Sugar House Clinic. EVS Director Jessica Rivera made Nelly interim manager of the cleaning team. She was ready for the challenge, even if she found it daunting, especially when it came to speaking English. Rivera felt she communicated well in her second language. Nelly worked hard on establishing a rapport with her team, both individually and as a group, something that Rivera appreciated.
Nelly's really good at that. She's good at inspiring others and influencing them positively and just working alongside them and helping them. She'll, leave her office and go help them out, make sure they feel comfortable, confident, just be right there beside them as they get some practice and till they're ready to go on their own.
Through the turmoil of the pandemic, Rivera and Nelly got to know each other better, and the Honduran shared with her boss the story of her journey to the United States. It gave Rivera chills.
Oh, when she first told me about her story, I definitely leveraged that in many ways when she was having difficulties with her confidence. I would tell her, don't forget how brave you are. You are so brave. Look what you did. I'm just in awe of what you have accomplished and overcome, and you can do this too.
Nelly approaches life in her own way, coming up with quirky ways of looking at things that still surprise Rivera.
Recently, she started couponing, and so she has amassed all of these things like toothpaste or soap or lotions and she does all this with her time and effort, and then she gives it all away. She gives it to her employees. She gave some to myself and our leadership team. Like, here, I brought this for you. She throws surprise parties for them, and her love just, overflows throughout. And I think that's what makes her story special, because she continues to choose to be just so happy and so vibrant and so content with things, even when they're hard.
Nelly's is far from the only story in Rivera's department that speaks to surviving hardships, long painful separations, and finally, against all odds, families becoming whole again. But even then, when loved ones are reunited, so much hard work remains for all involved to rebuild treasured relationships that until then had lingered only as rose-tinted memories. Like so many who have been through this journey to support their families from afar, the final journey still awaited Nelly, confronting the pain her son felt at the many years of separation he had had to go through in Honduras while Nelly worked in the US to support him.
A principios, fue difícil porque él no me...
At first, he was difficult because he didn't see me as a mom. We would get along like siblings. We'd joke around and everything. But at the beginning, it was like he looked at me like, who are you? Why do I have to do what you tell me?
Yo te tengo que hacer caso a ti.
One day, she decided to have it out with him.
Hasta que finalmente un día me senté con él, no lo regañé. No
Finally, one day I sat down with him, not to scold him, just to talk to him. I cried and I told him, I know that you resent me because I came here and left you. But I didn't come to this country to rebuild my life. I didn't come to this country to give myself the luxury. If I left you, I didn't forget about you. You remember when you went to school? What did people say?
¿Qué te decían, Leo? Le decían que tal vez era el mejor vestido, que llevaba buenos zapatos.
That you were the best dressed, you were the one who wore good shoes, you were the one who ate better, you were the one who always had money to invite your classmates who didn't have anything to eat. So you remember all those stories you yourself told me? I mean, how do you think you survived all that, right?
No, pues que mi mami no trabajaba.
She reminded him how his grandmother always had money for his needs.
Entonces le digo, yo sé, ella lo sacaba de su bolsa.
I know she just took it out of her purse and gave it to you. But think about it. My mom didn't work. She didn't work. Who was it that gave her money?
They faced off. Nelly wanted him to understand the sacrifices she had made for him, something he seemed up to that point never to have taken into account.
No, pues que vos. Nosotros en Honduras decimos vos. Ok.
Okay then, thanks to this one who is here, the one you don't love. I understand that you don't love me as a mother because I didn't raise you with me, but thanks to me, you were able to study. Thanks to me, I dressed you the way you were dressed, you had a roof over your head, nobody told you to get out because you didn't pay the rent, or they cut off your water because you didn't pay for it. You didn't lack anything. If you suffered, it was because you wanted to.
Tú sufriste fue porque tú quisiste.
Despite his life of relative luxury compared to his friends and classmates, her son had nevertheless become involved in the very world both his grandmother and Nelly herself hoped to insulate him from: street crime. As Nelly learned from conversations with him and others about his life on the streets in Catacamas and some of the dangerous people he knew there, so she became increasingly determined to reassert her maternal role, one that her own mother had provided her son in Nelly's absence.
Pero cuando él llegó aquí fue difícil. Fue difícil porque
When he came here, it was difficult. It was difficult because I wanted to be as a mother. As I told him, you always have been my son, even though you have been in Honduras. But I am your mother. Yes, he would say, but my mother has already died.
Sí, pero pues es que mi mamá ya se murió.
She and her son had to find a middle ground.
Entonces, ok, yo llegué a un punto que le dije, ok, vamos a hacer una cosa, no me mires como mamá, mírame como tu hermana mayor.
Then, okay, I said, let's do one thing. Don't look at me as mom, look at me as your sister. Look at me as your big sister who deserves the same respect. Look at me as a sister who struggled so that you can eat, who struggled so that you can have an education, so you can have good clothes like that. She will scold you. She is a big sister. If she sees you drinking and driving, she will slap you. For example, in front of me, you are not going to smoke because I don't smoke. I need you to respect me in that aspect. If I see that you are doing drugs, for example, I will hit you in front of whoever you are with.
Por ejemplo, ¿qué andas haciendo drogas? Te voy a trompear enfrente de quien estés.
Then he said, okay.
Entonces dijo él, okay.
From there, they began to define a new relationship. He called her the old girl, mi viejita. And when he'd admit to people that she was his mother, they'd express surprise.
Porque a veces él dice, vamos a la
Sometimes
casa.
he says, let's go to the house. Let's see if la viejita, the old lady, cooks for us. Only when he arrives, they find me and he says, look, it's my mom. One guy said, but why does he call her old lady? He said, because I love her. And the man laughed and said, when he told me let's go to the house to see if the old lady cooked, I imagined seeing an old lady, a little old lady there. And I tell him, no, that's what he calls me. He has never called me mom.
From the dirt streets and daily violence in Honduras that she escaped, through the money she sent home to protect best as she could her mother and eldest son, to her life now as a manager and leader, Nelly finds so much joy and satisfaction in seeing her children striving to make the most of the opportunities she has given them. Much like her mother, she insists on her children doing the best they can at school, and her youngest son did not disappoint.
Mi niño ahorita se graduó, el más chiquito de sexto
My
grado.
boy now graduated from 6th grade with the honor roll and a certificate signed by Donald Trump for being one of the top scorers.
Por Donald Trump, por ser uno de los que estaba más arriba en sus notas.
Clinical is part of the Scope Presents network and brought to you by University of Utah Health. If you liked what you heard, please be sure to subscribe and share with your friends. And if you haven't yet, why not give us a rating or review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts? Those ratings really help small podcasts like ours, and it makes our day to read them. And to all the nurses, doctors, admins, interpreters, operators, technicians, and all other hospital employees out there, we know you're listening, and we want to hear from you. Do you have a story from the hospital, a message for us, or maybe even the people in our story? Feel free to email us at hello@thescoperadio.com. Again, that's hello, HELLO, @thescoperadio.com. Clinical is produced by me, Mitch Sears, and Stephen Dark. Music in this episode by Christoph Wallers, Dan Howell, Aiden Balas, Ian Post, Luis Adrian, and Yehezkel Raz. Audio news clips from KUTV. Special thanks to Nayeli Hernandez for her translation and interpretation work. And of course, a heart-filled thanks to the men and women who have shared their stories with all of us and fight to this day to keep each and every one of us safe.